Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me to be here. It's good to be here, but a little bit daunting because as I look out across the room, I'm surrounded by the experts in Angelman syndrome. I'm not an expert in Angelman syndrome, and as I see here with the statistics, 350 people in Ireland, I suspect there's not very many people, present company accepted, who are experts. But what I'm here to talk to you about today is visual communication strategies. My background is as a speech and language therapist. I've been a speech and language therapist for 38 years. My passion initially after developmental paediatrics was learning disability, and that was not that I chose to go into learning disability, but family dictated I went that way, and I'm a great believer in fate. It was the right direction to go. Subsequently, the world of autism kicked in and took over, and I'm sure you as families will be familiar with that particular epidemic and wave of resources. But what that has taught me is really something that I probably knew from day one, the absolute importance of visual communication strategies. Now, Sarah very kindly gave me a bit of a brief for today. I explained to her, I've only come across 3 individuals with Angelman in my career. I'm not an expert in this. What do you want me to present on? So she said to me, she gave me a really hard task. She said, I would like everybody who comes today to go away with something that they haven't had before. So the challenge has been thrown out to me, and I just hope I can rise to that. So what is communication? Again, as we all know, communication is a major issue for children and adults with Angelman, and very few develop effective speech. But what I want to leave with you today, the message is, speech is actually not the most important thing, because only 7% of what I'm saying to you now is being conveyed to you on words. I'm going to be using body language, I'm going to be using facial expression, I'm going to be using gesture, I'll be using visual symbols, and again, all of my presentation is visual. Now, it was really important that we actually get this up and running this morning, because it's terribly hard to listen to somebody without having some visual consolidation of what I'm saying. Now, I've moved on quickly to my next slide. See, this is terrible. I go off on a tangent and I don't really stick to my script, so I'm just going to run this down. Okay. What we want to think about is no matter what we're doing in terms of speech, language, verbal or non-verbal, there's always 2 sides to communication. There's expression, which is what I'm saying to you, but there's also the receptive side. It's you being able to understand me. As I said, verbal and non-verbal, and it's the non-verbal element that I want to focus on. And it's always got to be a 2-way flow of information. You don't communicate when you're own. You might think on your own, you might act on your own, but you've always got to have a sender and a receiver. So why do we communicate? Now, it's just amazing the amount of communication you've probably done this morning without realizing it. We have to communicate to send messages, we have to communicate to develop relationships, and we have to communicate for interaction. And again, always bearing in mind, it's not always going to be verbal. So why do we communicate? Oh, we've had that one, sorry. Communicative functions. I just want to run through these quickly, because when we get to the level of talking about what we're actually going to do with visual communication strategies, let's think about, why do we have to communicate? The functions of communication are always going to be about requesting. That's going to be at a very early developmental level. The first thing you see your children doing, and this is our neurotypical children, the children who are developing along lines that we expect them to develop, requesting, putting the hands up to be lifted, then getting attention, banging, doing something very primitive, rejecting or refusing, commenting. Now, the first 3 would have been communicative functions that when in my life in learning disability, we could usually develop those communicative functions. The next level up, commenting, giving information, seeking information, and expressing feelings are at a higher level. But again, let's not dismiss them just yet. And finally, social routines. And again, how often do you say to somebody, hello, how are you? You actually really don't care how they are. It's a social routine, but you're engaging with them. You're starting interaction. Now, communication and Angelman syndrome, and this is where I do feel a bit of a fraud, because you people are going to be much more experienced than I am. But for today, I did my background research. And what I do know from the 2 children who are now adults that I've worked with in the past, there's very distinctive behaviours, am I right? Perhaps frequent laughing, frequent smiling. Certainly with these youngsters who have probably grown old with me, a severe delay in development noticed around the 6-12 months, little or no speech, some cognitive problems, easily excited, maybe restless, limited attention span, perhaps some movement, balance problems, poor coordination, and as a result, some behavioural difficulties. Am I hitting the spot there? So, thinking about that, thinking about what I've said about communication, two-way flow and the functions, let me just quickly take you through the building blocks for communication. And I like to think of this as a wall. And let's think about the wall that our children, our youngsters, our young adults with Angel Man will experience, the wall of developing communication. You hit the wall, but the foundation of that wall has got to be cognitive development, okay? I'm not going to expect a 1-year-old baby, and I don't want to be insulting to anybody's family member, but you're not going to expect a child of the age of 1 to be using sentences, because we don't expect children until they're about 2.5 to start to put 2 words together, 2-3 words together. So let's be realistic about what level we're at in terms of cognitive development. That's our foundation. Then we've got extracting words. Where are these words going to come from? Are they going to get them through listening? Are they going to get them through looking? Are you able to attend? So again, we've got to have those basic skills within our wall of foundation. Then, having got that, we're going to think about using words or using ways to communicate. Remembering. Memory is a key thing here. I can certainly teach somebody something, but are they going to remember that? Is that going to be consolidated? And are they going to be able to use it again? And turn-taking, again, back to the two-way flow of communication. Turn-taking is really important when it comes to the creative and interactive use of language and communication skills. Then we've got the social understanding, knowing what to say, who to say it to, when to say it, and back to your turn-taking. Being aware of others and not just, shouting out and it's about me and, having a bit of social understanding. And finally, sharing interests. At the moment, I'm feeling very fortunate because at least you're all looking my direction and nobody yet has started to look at their watch. So you're interested so far in what I have to say. But if you weren't, this whole communication thing would break down because I'd find it really hard to stand here and talk if you weren't interested. So again, thinking about developing communication skills with your individuals at home, there's got to be a shared interest. There's got to be something that you want to communicate about. Now, I'm not going to go into this in a huge amount of detail, and in fact, I'm just going to now go from the heart here. But communication is a highly complex activity, and it's something that we tend to take for granted because most of us in this room are good communicators, you're effective communicators. But if you take the two-way flow between 2 individuals, I'm sending out a message to you. In order for me to be able to send that message out to you now, I've got to have the words up here. There's a filing cabinet somewhere up here that tells me that everything in this room has a name, every action has a name. I'm able to put a grammar onto that. I'm able to give you the words in the right order in a way that you can understand them. I'm actually able to, because of my cognitive functioning, be able to sound out the words and use the phonics in the right order. So I'm able to say to you, hand, as opposed to tanned or canned. And in order for me to do that, and for you to be able to hear me, the air has to travel up from my lungs, has to go through my voice box here. I've got to be able to move my tongue within my mouth at great speed and great precision to get all of this that's coming from here to come out in the right order to help you to be able to understand what I'm saying. Now, that's only one side of the communication process. The other side of the communication process is you have to sit there, you have to be able to listen, you have to be able to filter out anything that you hear in the background, which we'll come on to. You've actually got to have the same filing cabinet up here so that you can make sense of the sounds that I'm giving you in the right order. So if I was to say something to you like halam, hasham, ta, and I don't really speak Hebrew, but if I did, that might say something terribly important. You don't have that vocabulary up here, so you won't understand what I'm saying. So you can see what a complicated situation this becomes. Throw on top of that the ability to take turns, to know when to talk, to know when to listen, to know when to challenge, to know when to walk away because you're not interested. And you can see just how complicated the interactive process of communication is. And then we wonder why many of our individuals who have difficulties with cognition, who maybe don't have the social understanding that they should have, why communication becomes such a big issue. But we still push them to want to talk. So what I would be proposing today is, let's look at this in a slightly different way. Yes, we would like everybody to be able to communicate both verbally and non-verbally, but in order to develop that, I would like us to go right back to the level where we achieve success, because nothing achieves quite so much as success. So first of all, let's look at communication and what it involves. In order to be able to communicate, I have to establish, where's my girls? I have to establish attention with somebody, okay? If you're not attending to me, our communication system is going to break down. So having established attention, I think somebody did something over here. My attention can shift, but I have the skills to take in the information over there and come back to you. I can process that information as not being terribly important, and I can retrieve whatever it was we were talking about. And I can send you the information that you want to hear about, I hope. But sometimes with our individuals who might have learning difficulty, might have some issues with attention, we can make the auditory signal much more difficult. How many of you with your individuals, and I'm not just talking about your family members with Angelman syndrome, make what you say more difficult to understand by repeating yourself? Now, I happen to have 4 daughters. They're all grown up now. But I remember the days when we'd all been running out to school in the morning and I'd been saying, right, is everybody ready? Lucy, you haven't got your school bag. Is everybody ready? I've told you before, will you get your school bag? Listen, have you got your lunches? And I'm repeating myself. I'm raising my voice. I'm changing the order of the words I use, and I'm making that auditory signal too difficult for them to understand. Also, think about a person's auditory experience. How many of you are all switched on sometimes and it's almost like there's just too much going on? How many of you just switch off altogether? And please don't do that for the next 10 minutes. How many of you actually have difficulty in filtering out what is important? I don't think too many of you have, because whilst I've been standing here, there's been lots of other noises, and you haven't. You've been really good. This is good audience. You haven't actually I haven't lost eye contact with too many of you. So we can actually just disengage with what's not important. But there's lots of people who do have difficulty shifting and re-engaging their attention. Let's think of an example. How many of you, and this happened to me yesterday when I was driving down from Downpatrick to here. I'm listening to U105, which is a radio station in the north of Ireland. And when you get to a certain point, just outside Newry, you lose it. And then you go a wee bit further and you get it back. But in the meantime, I was really interested in hearing about something, and I don't know what happened because I lost the signal. So that communication message broke down for me. Another example, and all the wives will maybe relate to this. How many of you live with men who channel hop? And you're just watching Coronation Street and your husband wants to see the sports results. And then you have no idea what's happening to poor Haley when she goes for a checkup. You've lost the plot because your intention has been disengaged. And I was going to say, imagine an auditory system that isn't as efficient as yours and mine. And that is a real issue if we're trying to develop communication skills. Now, we had a chat beforehand. What about sign language? Now, I'm talking about visual communication strategies, and sign language is visual. But I suppose the next thing that I want to talk about is the difference between a transient message and a non-transient message. So if I sign to you, like, here we go again, ladies. Did you get that? Oh, she's very good. But actually, if you weren't such a good communicator, you might need me to repeat that. And it might take me a long time to repeat that because it moves, it's there, and it's gone. Now, you're good because you can process at speed, but if you couldn't, that's a transient message. Sometimes sign language isn't universally understood. How many of you would know what this one means? Of course, you probably Who do we think? I have to use one that you wouldn't know. What's that? In British Sign Language, in Liverpool, that's sugar. Now, do you know why that's sugar? Because a long time ago in a Tate and Lyle factory, there was a high population of deaf, you shouldn't use the word deaf, hearing impaired workers, and they all got industrial dermatitis. So that was sugar. But that's not universally understood, even though it's a sign. So it may not be universally understood, and whilst sign language definitely does have its place, it has its limitations. And if we relate this, if we can get this to work, yeah.
Can get very frustrated if you have to take the time to
understand them.
And when I was going to school a long time ago, now we had we used sign language, and it took us half an hour to understand what he was trying to tell us.
Because you're a great girl to have in the audience, because you're, consolidating what I'm trying to tell them. Thank you. So consider the profile of people with a learning disability or learning difficulties, and thinking about what we've already said about communication. Remember, signs are going to be transient. We might also have some difficulties with language comprehension, motor planning, attending, understanding, abstract representations, memory, and many of those other supporting skills. But I suppose for me, one of the things, and I'm thinking specifically to one gentleman who did have Angelman, who I did work with, who I tried very hard to teach him Makaton. And this was before the days where I really got into visual communication. And I will meet him in the street now, because he also lives in Downpatrick, and he'll go like this to me, "Ah!" Now, that's him saying hello in Makaton, but he has motor planning problems, and he's got some motor coordination problems. So, I didn't need to teach him Makaton. I should have been thinking augmentative gesture, because it's the same thing. We achieve the same result, but hours of blood, sweat and tears for me to teach Ryan particular signs did not pay off. So motor and memory difficulties result in children and adults producing their own personal versions of signs. Many of our population are not able to effectively interpret the subtle differences in signs if they're introduced, if too many subtle differences are introduced. So perhaps, we're saying good, we're also saying hello, and I don't know BSL, which is British Sign Language, and I don't know, is it la? Love that you have here. I don't know those, and I'm sure there's subtle differences between them, so we can see how the whole system would break down. We'll move on from sign language and back to our transient and non-transient messages. So some forms of communication are transient. It's here, you say it or you sign it, and then it's gone. So speech and signs. But we've got lots of communication that's non-transient, and this is where I want to focus on. So we've got some gestures that are non-transient. How many of you would say to your families, here? And you keep your hand here, because here's where you want them to be. So that some gestures can be non-transient, but actually more importantly, pictures are non-transient. How many of you get off a plane, you've just arrived into Dublin Airport, you want to get your baggage and you want to go to the loo, what's the first thing you look for? The visual picture that tells you where these things are. Printed words, exit, juries, meetings, non-transient, it's going to stay there. And whilst it would be great to get our population up to the level where we can use printed words as a communication means, that may not happen. But where I'd like to think about today is objects. So if I put that up and I go, you'll all get the message very quickly. I want a drink.
That means you want a drink.
Well done, indeed it does. So visual communication. Visual communication, the things that enhance the communication process. Just to recap, it's an integral part of the two-way of communication flow. So we've got body language, but we've also got natural environmental cues. So again, thinking about the home situation, thinking about the school situation. If you'd walked in here today and all the chairs were in a pile at the back of the room, where would you have sat? You would all have hovered around and looked to see who's going to lift a chair first of all. You didn't have to do that because this room was organised with a natural environmental clue to communicate to you where you had to sit. So thinking again, and this isn't me making a judgment, but some of the homes that I've gone into in my career as a speech and language therapist, and the child is maybe having a tantrum, the home can actually be quite chaotic. You know, the furniture is moved around, there might be piles of stuff here, there might be something here, and maybe the individual doesn't actually always know where they should eat. Maybe they don't always know where they should put something. Maybe they don't always know why something goes here. So think about the physical environment in which you communicate. Traditional tools for organising and giving information. Now, we've already talked briefly about signs and things like that, and we will recap on that. But there are specifically designed tools to meet specific needs. Now, I just want to think briefly about communication. Going back to the brief I was given for today about please leave with something that you haven't heard before. As I say, perhaps for some of the children and adults that I've worked with in the past, I have overshot where they're going to go because maybe words and language wasn't the most appropriate target for me to aim for. And if I've learned anything in the years since I started being a speech and language therapist, the first level for me is communication. The first level for me is the tantrum. And whilst we don't want to encourage it and we don't want to develop it, we've got to acknowledge that it is the first level of communication. Tantrums will be for two reasons. They'll either be reactive, something's happening and I don't want it to happen, or it'll be directive. I want that, and I'm going to have it, and I'm going to throw myself on the floor here until I get it. So whilst you don't want to develop it, acknowledge it because your individual is telling you something here. The next thing for me, and Philip's mummy was telling me about this, that his communication, he will take her and show her what he wants. And that's absolutely brilliant because he's demonstrating communicative intent. He's using motoric communication. The number of times I've said to families, so how does he let you know he wants something? Well, he doesn't have to because he knows where the crisps are and he knows where the juice are, and he just takes my hand and he gets me to help him open the fridge. So then I become a big, nasty, horrible individual and I say, well, sabotage all that. Unless you can teach your families the power of communication and the need to communicate, unless they have to convey a message to you that I want something, he'll continue to take you by the hand and you'll do it. So let's develop something in the middle. How many of you are familiar with PECS? Has anybody experienced PECS? Well now, PECS, the Picture Exchange Communication System, in its purest form, is hard enough to do, but in actual fact for me, the real strength about PECS, taking it bigger and wider, is to develop the exchange. It's the exchange of communication. You do something to me and I will do something back to you. You give me something and I will give you something back, and then I start to learn just how powerful communication is, and I would strongly recommend that, and it's becoming very popular across the whole of the island of Ireland. So again, perhaps if you're trying to develop communication with your therapist or whatever, do it. And just for any of you in the room who do have older families, there isn't an upward age to learning for this, and I'm going to tell you about a friend of mine called Angela, who at the age of 39, and she is a lower functioning individual. She does have autism, but it doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. And Angela would have probably been in what we would describe in my part of the world as an intensive support facility where all of her care was provided. And we introduced Angela to objects for communication and exchange. And so every time we wanted to do something with Angela, like say, it's dinner time, Angela, we would give her, I had a box of props to bring with me today and I've left them sitting in my daughter's flat in Monkstown, so I'm happy to ad-lib with a hotel. So let's pretend that, so every time we want to take, it was actually dinner in a plate, but we would say to Angela, it's dinner time, we would take her by the hand over hand, take her to where dinner is, get her to match this with another one that we have. This wasn't what she was going to drink out of, and when she got there, she knew that she was going to the place to have her dinner, and that's what told her that she was going to the place to have her dinner. So that was great, and we did this for days and days, and everything was fine. And then one day, we were all sitting about 10:30 or 11, and Angela got off her rocking chair, she went over to her box of objects, she lifted up a plate, and she dandered off on her own and set it down beside where the dinner table was. She was telling us it was time for dinner. And it was just such a wonderful moment because she'd cracked it by using objects. A non-transient communication system at a level at which she could understand. She'd something she wanted to say, and she was able to do it independently. So at the age of 39, Angela did that. I'm not saying any of your families will do that, but I would say it's worth trying, the use of objects. So those are the gestures and motor.
I had to give her dinner.
We did. We absolutely did, because do you know what? If she hadn't got her dinner, then she wouldn't have understood that when you communicate, you get what you want. I think you're wasted. So thinking about objects, I have these just random objects here. If I throw this up now, what do I need?
I know.
I don't, I'm only joking. When you're using objects to encourage communication, the thing about objects for communication is you don't use the communication objects for the thing that is going to happen. So create a box of communication objects. And for me, it's a great way of developing symbolic understanding of the environment, but also a way for developing communication. So you'll need two sets of everything. So you just choose randomly the things I would use, perhaps toilet roll for toileting, or a pamper if you're at that stage, cup, plate, keys for out, handbag for maybe going swimming, a bag, sorry, for going swimming, shoe for something else, car for play, brick for, say, maybe work or whatever. And you have your box of objects. And in each one of the places that you want to use, in each one of the places where you want to do the activity, like going to the bathroom or going for dinner or going to have a drink, you have another little box with a matching object. And so when you say to somebody, toilet, they put that in a box outside the toilet, then they go in and do their business. So you don't use that as the learning thing. I'll be here for a while if anybody wants to go over this, because I've only 40 minutes and this is a whirlwind trip through this. So objects, for me, is the kickstart of all of this. And again, if you're abroad, how many of you go somewhere, you don't speak the language, and you want to find, say, sun cream, and you could bring in an old bottle and you'd be showing this to the chemist. It's your object that helps him to understand what it is you want. So that's a very strong.
I was abroad recently in Germany. Now, while I have German, I didn't. I took whatever the bottle, like I think I want some dark beer, so I took the bottle and showed the person. So it doesn't only have to be people with communication
Problems. Yeah. Well done, that was a good thing to do. Pictures. The next level up from object is pictures. But actually what I want to throw in here is a little thing in the middle. And for those of you who have access to IT and are good at IT, are you all familiar with Boardmaker? Yes. Well, in the middle between objects and pictures, your object is 3 dimensions, okay? So if you want to move your families on to understanding pictures as a means of communication, and if you're using PECS with your little one, a good step in between is to print out a large picture from Boardmaker and cut it out and laminate it so that it's not actually a flat picture, it's the shape of the picture. And the people who invented that, it's called a Toby, a true icon, true object icon. And the Tobys are great, and they were introduced by 2 American ladies from Orange County in New York. And I'd strongly recommend you go onto their website, Icon I Can, and they give you lots of ideas about how to work this stuff. But for me, the Tobys are a huge support if you're trying to move from objects to pictures. In my early days, what we would have been taught to do all the time was, once they can match an object to a picture, then they'll understand the picture. That isn't necessarily now my working experience. So the Tobys in the middle are a good jump, and I should add them in here. And then we've got words. Again, if you're going to introduce words, I would use a big picture and a word at the bottom. And again, you may never get a full understanding of the words, but you might get visual recognition of the shape of something along with the picture, and it adds meaning. And then we've got sign language, remember transitory, non-transitory, and then we've got expressive communication, verbal, non-verbal. But I think for our population, we're probably going to focus more on the use of objects and the exchange to start off with.